In 1980, a nurse in Texas was finally caught after hospital administrators noticed that during her shifts, infant mortality rates were 300% higher than any other shift. When investigators reviewed her records, they discovered she had killed an estimated 60 babies over 2 years, injecting them with lethal doses of drugs while their parents waited in nearby rooms. But what made investigators' blood run cold wasn't just the number of victims. It was her reason. When asked why she did it, she calmly explained that she enjoyed the rush of trying to revive them, the feeling of playing God, deciding who lived and who died. And she smiled when she said it, a genuine smile that haunted every investigator who saw it. This is just one of the 2 cases you're about to discover, stories so dark that they continue to terrify the world decades later. Before we dive into these disturbing cases, leave us a comment with what time it is where you are and whether you can sleep after these stories. And if you're brave enough not to miss any of our weekly cases, subscribe to the channel now. Turn off the lights, turn up the volume, and let's unravel these mysteries that still haunt us today. San Antonio, Texas, 1977. Janine Jones was hired as a licensed vocational nurse in the pediatric intensive care unit at Bexar County Hospital. She was 26 years old, personable, seemed genuinely dedicated to her work with sick children. Her supervisors noted that she volunteered for extra shifts, was always willing to help, and showed what appeared to be deep emotional investment in her young patients. But within months of her arrival, something strange began happening. Babies under her care were experiencing sudden, unexplained medical emergencies at an alarming rate. Seizures, cardiac arrests, respiratory failures, all occurring with no clear medical cause and almost exclusively during Jones's shifts. The pattern was undeniable to anyone who looked at the data. During Jones's shifts, the pediatric ICU went from a normally quiet unit to a constant emergency zone. Alarms would sound, babies would crash, and Jones would be right there, rushing in to save them. Sometimes she succeeded, sometimes she didn't, but she was always present, always involved, always the hero trying to bring them back. Hospital staff began calling the deaths during her shifts the death shift, but it would take years before anyone seriously investigated why. The problem was that Jones was good at creating doubt. The babies she targeted were already sick, already vulnerable. When they died, there were plausible medical explanations, complications from their existing conditions, and Jones had a talent for muddying the waters, suggesting alternative theories, pointing to other possible causes, making investigators second-guess themselves. But the statistical anomaly was impossible to ignore. Between 1977 and 1982, an estimated 60 infants and children died under suspicious circumstances during Jones's care. That's 60 families who brought their sick children to a hospital expecting treatment and left with tiny coffins. Hospital administrators knew something was wrong, but they couldn't prove it, couldn't catch her in the act, couldn't definitively link her to the deaths. So they made a decision that would haunt them forever. Instead of reporting their suspicions to police, they quietly fired Jones and gave her a neutral recommendation, essentially passing the problem to someone else. Jones immediately found work at a pediatric clinic in Kerrville, Texas. Within weeks of starting, the same pattern emerged. Babies were experiencing sudden emergencies, going into cardiac arrest, having unexplained seizures, all during Jones's care. But this time, the clinic's doctor, Kathleen Holland, was paying attention. After a series of particularly suspicious incidents, Dr. Holland conducted her own investigation and discovered something terrifying. Vials of succinylcholine, a powerful muscle relaxant that causes paralysis and can stop breathing, were disappearing from the clinic's supplies. The missing vials corresponded exactly with emergency incidents involving Jones's patients. Dr. Holland confronted Jones and immediately contacted authorities. When police searched Jones's home, they found a stash of medical supplies, including drugs that should never leave a medical facility. They also found something more disturbing, a detailed journal where Jones had documented her victims, noting which drugs she had used, how long it took for symptoms to appear, how the resuscitation attempts had gone. It read like a scientist's lab notes, clinical observations on human experimentation. There was no remorse, no recognition of wrongdoing, just data collection on how different drugs affected different-sized babies. During interrogation, Jones showed a complete lack of empathy that chilled investigators. She admitted to injecting babies with drugs, but claimed she was trying to prove they needed more intensive monitoring, that she was exposing flaws in the medical system. When pressed about the babies who died, she shrugged and said that some sacrifices were necessary to improve pediatric care overall. But in unguarded moments, the truth slipped out. She loved the excitement, the adrenaline rush of an emergency, the feeling of being the center of attention as everyone rushed in to help. She described the act of injecting a baby and watching it code as thrilling, like riding a roller coaster. The babies weren't human to her. They were objects she could use to create the drama and excitement she craved. The legal case against Jones was complicated by the fact that succinylcholine metabolizes quickly and is difficult to detect in autopsy. Prosecutors could only prove a handful of cases definitively, even though they believed she was responsible for dozens more. In 1984, Jones was convicted of murder in one case and injury to a child in another. She was sentenced to 99 years in prison. But because of Texas sentencing laws at the time, she was eligible for parole after serving just a fraction of her sentence. For years, families of her suspected victims lived in terror that she might be released, that she might somehow find her way back into a position where she could access vulnerable children again. Jones has been in prison since 1984. And now, at 74 years old, she continues to maintain her innocence despite overwhelming evidence. She has given interviews where she claims she was a scapegoat, that the hospital was covering up its own negligence, that she was a dedicated nurse who loved children. But those who investigated her case remember something else. They remember the coldness in her eyes when she talked about the babies who died, the way she seemed to relish describing the medical emergencies, the complete absence of normal human emotion when confronted with the suffering she caused. Multiple psychologists who evaluated her concluded she was a textbook psychopath, someone completely incapable of empathy, who viewed other humans as objects to be used for her own gratification. The case exposed horrifying vulnerabilities in the medical system. Hospitals were more concerned about liability and reputation than patient safety, allowing Jones to move from facility to facility even when they suspected she was killing patients. Background checks were minimal. There was no centralized database to track suspicious medical deaths, and whistleblowers were discouraged from speaking out. Jones's case led to major reforms in how hospitals handle suspicious deaths and report problem employees, but those reforms came too late for the estimated 60 children who died under her care. Feeling that chill down your spine? If you're enjoying these mysteries, leave a like on the video to help us continue investigating cases like these. And in the comments, tell us if you've heard of these cases before or know any different theories. Subscribe so you don't miss the next mysteries. Now get ready, because what comes next will keep you up at night. If Janine Jones showed us how evil can hide in a caregiver's uniform, our next case shows us something even more disturbing: how it can be systematically protected, enabled, and covered up by institutions that should have stopped it. Because our second person didn't work alone, he had help, hundreds of people who knew what he was doing and chose to look away. Jimmy Savile was born in Leeds, England in 1926, and by the 1960s he had become one of the most famous celebrities in Britain. He was a radio DJ, television presenter, host of Top of the Pops and Jim'll Fix It, shows that were watched by millions. He had access to everyone, from prime ministers to the royal family. He was knighted by Queen Elizabeth, received a papal knighthood from the Vatican, raised millions for charity. He was beloved, trusted, considered a national treasure. For over 50 years, Savile used that fame, that access and that trust to commit what may be the most extensive series of sexual abuse in modern history, with an estimated 500 victims ranging in age from 5 to 75. Savile's pattern of abuse was methodical and protected by his celebrity status. He would visit hospitals, schools and care facilities as part of his charity work, specifically targeting institutions that housed vulnerable people, children with disabilities, psychiatric patients, people who wouldn't be believed if they reported abuse. He became a regular fixture at Stoke Mandeville Hospital, even getting his own room and keys to secure areas. He volunteered at Broadmoor, a high-security psychiatric hospital, gaining unprecedented access to some of the most vulnerable patients in the country, and everywhere he went, he left victims in his wake. The most disturbing aspect of Savile's case isn't just what he did, it's how many people knew and did nothing. Hospital staff saw him entering rooms with young patients and emerging with those patients distressed. BBC employees witnessed inappropriate behavior toward minors. Police received multiple reports over the decades, but closed investigations without charges. People in positions of authority knew or strongly suspected, but Savile was too famous, too connected, too valuable. The institutions he worked with benefited from his fundraising, from his celebrity association, so they looked away, made excuses, protected him. Savile also hid in plain sight through a carefully crafted public persona. He dressed eccentrically in tracksuits and gold jewelry, spoke in a distinctive style, presented himself as a harmless eccentric. He frequently joked about his behavior in ways that should have raised alarms, but were dismissed as just Jimmy being Jimmy. He made comments on television about his access to young girls, about his activities in hospitals, statements that in retrospect were barely veiled admissions. But he said them with a smile, made them sound like jokes, and everyone laughed along. It was a form of psychological manipulation on a national scale, conditioning the public to dismiss red flags as eccentricity. Savile died in 2011 at age 84, having never faced justice for his crimes. His funeral was attended by hundreds. He was praised as a charitable icon, and plans were made for memorials. But within a year, the truth began to emerge. A documentary was prepared by the BBC that detailed allegations from multiple victims. Though the BBC initially shelved the documentary, other media outlets began investigating, and the floodgates opened. Hundreds of victims came forward, their stories spanning 5 decades, describing abuse in hospitals, schools, BBC facilities, even backstage at charity events. The scope of Savile's abuse was staggering. A formal investigation concluded he had abused at least 500 people, with incidents documented in 14 hospitals, at BBC premises, on school grounds, in care facilities. The ages of victims ranged from young children to elderly patients. Some victims were in comas when he abused them, others had severe disabilities that prevented them from reporting or being believed. He specifically targeted the most vulnerable, those least able to defend themselves or seek justice. And he did it all while being celebrated as a national hero. The institutional failures that enabled Savile were systematic and extensive. The BBC had received complaints about his behavior as early as the 1960s, but took no action. Hospitals gave him access that no volunteer should have had. Police closed investigations without serious inquiry. The Catholic Church gave him a papal knighthood despite rumors about his behavior. Everyone benefited from association with Savile, his fame, his fundraising, his connections, so everyone chose not to look too closely. The conspiracy wasn't organized. It was a collective decision by hundreds of people to prioritize reputation and benefit over the safety of vulnerable people. After his death, Saville's legacy was systematically dismantled. His knighthoods were posthumously revoked, his name was removed from buildings and programs, his gravestone was removed and destroyed, memorials were taken down. But the damage he caused is permanent. 500 victims lived with their trauma in silence because they knew they wouldn't be believed if they accused a national hero. Countless others saw the abuse happen and carried the guilt of not speaking up. And an entire country had to confront the uncomfortable reality that they had celebrated, honored, and protected a predator for half a century. What makes Jones and Saville particularly terrifying is how they exploited systems designed to protect the vulnerable. Jones used her position as a caregiver to access victims who couldn't defend themselves, in an environment where her credentials gave her credibility and authority. Saville used his celebrity and charitable work to gain access to hospitals and institutions, creating a halo effect that made people dismiss allegations as impossible. Both understood that certain positions come with built-in credibility, that uniforms and fame can be armor against suspicion. These cases also reveal disturbing truths about institutional priorities. The hospitals that employed Jones chose to quietly fire her rather than report her, protecting themselves from scandal while allowing her to find new victims. The institutions that gave Saville access prioritized his fundraising and celebrity association over the safety of their patients and children. In both cases, protecting the institution's reputation was deemed more important than protecting vulnerable people from predators. These cases continue to terrify us because they expose how easily evil can flourish when institutions choose reputation over responsibility. The question that haunts investigators and families is how many others are out there right now, protected by institutional silence, enabled by systems that prioritize reputation over safety, hiding behind credentials and celebrity while victimizing the vulnerable. Jones and Saville weren't caught because someone finally did the right thing. They were caught because their patterns became too obvious to ignore. How many others have been more careful, more subtle, better at covering their tracks? These cases continue to haunt us. If you're as disturbed as we are, leave a like, comment your theories, and share with anyone brave enough to listen. Explore our channel to learn about more unsolved mysteries and the darkest secrets in history. If you haven't subscribed yet, join the brave souls who follow our cases. Hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications so you don't miss any new cases. Leave your like if this video left you thinking, and share it with that friend who says they're not afraid of anything. Comments are open. Tell us what other disturbing cases you want us to investigate. Until next time, and sleep well if you can.